TTB Music Podcast.
Took the headphones off. It's been 7 years and it's smoothly into the start, like we always was.
Indeed, this is
and all that.
Our eighth year running now. Fantastic! Happy birthday!
As hard as it is to believe, people. Yes, we genuinely started this 7 years ago in November.
It feels like 7 years since the last podcast. Actually,
it does feel a long time since the last podcast. Yeah. The good news is, unlike that heady time back when, November the 19th, 20th and 21st, podcast parts 1, 2 and 3.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Not only did we review 5 albums, we then went on to discuss whether or not the Stone Roses was a classic album or not. It's not.
It is.
And also, who can forget, our discussion over the greatest rap albums of all time.
Oh, I mean, in many ways, that's kind of revisited us from time to time, which is good.
It is.
There you go.
It is. It has. Anyway, yes. Apologies for our slackness of late, but you know, it's the way we roll. And to make up for that, we will be. There are still another 3 podcasts coming away before the end of the year. Unbelievably. Pete's trying to count here and figuring out how this is going to happen, but it is, honest.
I've just figured that one out. Yeah. Good.
But
marvellous.
Let's get on with this exciting podcast we got for you this time. We have the latest album by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Skeleton Tree, Divine Comedy Foreverland, Teenage Fanclub Here, Regina Spektor's Remember Us to Life, Angel Olson, My Woman, and Bon Iver's 22 A Million. And we shall start with the 16th studio album from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. This one was recorded partly in the midst of him losing his son, who quite literally fell off the edge of a cliff. But the album had been started before then. However, I think it's safe to say there is a quite dark, typical Cave-ish kind of theme to this record, regardless of that. But let's start with Mr. Cave and Peter.
Right. This is a good Nick Cave album. I recall us doing a Nick Cave and Bad Seeds album at least once before.
Yeah, we did. I think we did last one, and we did the
ones before that.
Whatchamacallit one, the band thing before Dig Lazarus Dig.
Yes, that's right. So I mean, this is this is a good Nick Cave and Bad Seeds album. It's a quite an easy one to listen to as well. Darkness of tone obviously aside, it's a relatively short album.
Yes, which is a theme of several of the albums.
Thank goodness. And actually, it's a very sort of very easy album to listen to, in both musically and in terms of the band. When you think about how many decades has it been now? Several.
Yeah, well, 79, 70, late 70s birthday 70s. Party.
I mean, there's a quality here that he manages to repeat each time, and one feels that there's never a duff album. I didn't find anything on this album in particular that I really strongly thought was a weaker track. I particularly liked. I'm going to go with a different theme this time. I actually particularly like the middle of the album.
Oh, okay.
With Magneto and Anthracene.
My 2 least favourite tracks of the album.
There's plenty of other good stuff on there as well. But I found this a very enjoyable, if you can enjoy, a Nick Cave album.
Yeah, so it's interesting what you said. I think find it easy listening. I actually thought this might be something that for many listeners might be a quite difficult album, since there are at least half the album is almost kind of spoken word performance over kind of ambient backing tracks kind of thing, but there is a kind of raw, intense nature to it, as is often the case with Cave's work. which means that it's not necessarily an album I would recommend to Bad Seed newcomers if I was choosing one to as an entry point into the back catalogue. However, I do, like you, I think it's actually it's a really good record and actually rewards multiple listenings. Gets better and stronger on each listen. Jesus Alone, the opening track, I particularly like. It's got a kind of hypnotic kind of
definitely
appeal to it. Funny enough, as I said, I thought Magneto was the weakest track for me. Things like Girl in Amber I really liked, and it's almost sang in a kind of gruff, kind of half whisper kind of thing. Almost element of Angelo Badman, whatever his name is. Yeah. Twin Peaks kind of thing.
Sort of ambulance that comes through.
And there's a lovely the song second last track on the album, Distant Sky, which is a duet with Else Torp, the Danish soprano, which I think is just a beautiful, beautiful song, and shows how good he is at writing songs, duets.
Yeah.
So obviously you've heard the Kylie one, PJ Harvey, and
famous one.
PJ Harvey, and all those kind of things. And his songwriting does suit the dual voice approach, and so it has a Metacritic score of 95. Which I think is possibly the highest Metacritic score
That's the highest score I've ever come across.
We've come across.
Wow.
So it's clearly been well received critically as well as by us.
Excellent.
But more importantly, by us. Moving on, we go on to the 11th studio album by the Divine Comedy.
Really?
Yep.
Nice.
So return of
number one.
Neil Hannon, and this is called Foreverland, and. This is weird for me, because I have to confess, in the early days of this band, a band I just didn't really get particularly. And I was very much a take 'em or leave 'em kind of thing, even though I knew people that were big fans. But kind of over the years, I've been kind of worn down to a certain degree. But in a good way, simply because I've been worn down by for me, the kind of consistent quality of output of Hannon's work, either with the band or off on his various solo or collaborative projects outside of the band.
The cricket one's my favourite.
Absolutely, both parts, brilliant. To the point where I actually think he's kind of almost our kind of modern day Noel Coward, Cole Porter kind of thing. Consistently funny, theatrical, whimsical, I suppose is a one to use. And just funny lyrically, just really, really funny lyrically, and clearly when you've got songs called Napoleon Complex and Catherine the Great and stuff like that on this record, they are kind of lyrically as funny as you would expect them to be, including some very good lines like "She looked bloody good on a horse," which I particularly like in Catherine the Great. And rhyming Brainier with Lithuania as well, which has to be commended.
And the king of Lithuania.
Exactly, yeah. And it's this music which is pop, pastoral chamber pop, blah 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 blah. And I love it. Yeah. I've really, really loved this record. Really, really, really enjoyed it. There's some beautiful stuff in it. There's, as well as being funny, there's some stuff about him and his wife and about relationships, which is quite funny. In fact, the duet on this album as well. Funny Peculiar is a duet with his not wife, his partner, who is also a singer-songwriter called Kathy Davey, who incidentally has an album out herself at the moment called New Forest. But there's a song about their relationship, I think, which is How Can You Leave Me on My Own? And I just love it when it says, "When did you say you're coming home? When you leave me, I become a dickhead, a bag-smelling, count-swelling dickhead. I drink too much tea and eat too many biscuits. I look at naked girls because I'm too weak to resist it." It's like,
I surgically remove all the greens from my diet.
Yes. And it's just great. It's really, 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 really funny, but funny, and the music backs it up too. So it's not just, hey, I can write a funny lyric, but the music's a bit crap.
Yeah.
I think the music matches up to it too, and I think for the first particularly kind of like 6 tracks, this album, almost 6-7 tracks are almost perfect as far as albums go this year. Last bit of the album, less good, but still good, and overall, spoiler alert, this is my album of the podcast.
All right, okay. Gosh, well, better say something good. No, I agree with everything you've said. This, for me, was... I haven't decided if it's my album of the podcast yet, but it's certainly up there. And in terms of the selection we listened to this time, he is consistently funny and consistently entertaining. And as you say, the band as well, it wouldn't work without them. And in fact, I know it's sort of sung his solo projects to high praises too, but I actually always think Divine Comedy works better together with his combined lyrics and the accompanying music of the band. This, for me, felt like a return to form. The sort of bombast of the first couple of albums, which, let's get on, getting on for like 20 years ago now.
Absolutely.
Is reflected in songs like Napoleon Complex and Catherine the Great. You can imagine those songs appearing 20 years ago, and that's not a criticism, by the way. I think it's reflective of his ability to still turn out a really funny story to his songs. So I think it's a really, really strong album in that regard. I didn't towards the end of the album. I found it quite consistent, actually. Yes, the start's probably stronger, but How Can You Leave Me on My Own? And I joined the Foreign Legion, which I also quite enjoyed as well. And again reminded me of the past. But it's not all about the past. I actually think I think they've mellowed a little bit, which kind of helps, because that bombast of things like, In the Woodshed and all that years back, it wouldn't quite fit now. I found his vocals. I found it a little bit distracted to begin with. He's got a much softer voice these days as well. But hey, that age. Yeah. It gets. I mean, I've got a bit of a cough tonight. That could be age. So I found that a little bit distracted to begin with. But actually, as the album wore on, that was less of an issue for me. So yeah, haven't quite decided yet, but it's definitely up there.
So we now move on to
caveat that by saying, obviously, if there's been some story I've missed
about his throat,
his throat, I take it all back.
So we now move. This is a good one for me, because I'm looking forward to saying this. We now move on to the 10th studio album by Teenage Fanclub from Glasgow, who are affectionately known as the Fannies.
Excellent.
By their fans. Latest album here. I think it's been 6 years since the last album. And as I was saying to you earlier on, this is the album that I kind of forgot we were doing until last night. So I had to kind of rush a bit on this one, which is also quite embarrassing, since I'm going to see them in a couple of weeks' time.
Really?
Yeah.
That makes you a fanny.
That makes me a fanny.
Excellent.
Not the first time I've been called that.
No.
So, Beat. Quoting the first song, which is still called "I'm in Love." Are you in love with Here?
It's all right. I actually thought of. I thought of you, and I actually thought of my brother.
You thought my Vanny?
No. Let's not go there. I thought of my brother-in-law actually as well, who's been encouraging my sister-in-law to get into Teenage Fanclub about 25 years too late. And I actually thought this album would probably be a nice stepping-in point, because it's a kind of middle of the road new indie album. I mean, let's be honest. Teenage Fanclub for me, I probably arrived just a little bit, probably 6 months too late to the party.
Yeah.
In terms of the original sort of, the first coming, as it were. So I actually, for me, they're a band that have kind of always been there, but I've never really sort of got into.
Yeah.
So I actually, from that perspective, I actually found this album quite an enjoyable listen as well. Again, as with Divine Comedy, 25 years later, it's perhaps just a little bit mellower. So not so much, and I've been dying to say this, not so much Teenage Fanclub, but Middle-Aged Fanclub. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. But again, a fairly solid album, because that's my catchphrase and I haven't used it for a while.
This is true.
And I mean, I'm in Love is probably one of the standout tracks for me. But again, there are some really good songs on there, and it perhaps tapers off towards the end.
I think I would agree with that. Totally. I think the classic. I think this is definitely a side one album.
This is a side one album, but that's great. It's great that it feels like a proper album as well.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, I've been a fan of the band from early days, and I think I had this. This is the 10th studio album. I think I own the first 6.
Yeah.
And I was really big fan of them. I've seen them a couple of times, but they're not for quite a while. And one of the things I've always liked about the band is it is very much band. You have 3 you have 3 singers songwriters in the band. So you have Norman Blake, Gerard Love, and Raymond McGinley. And it's very much particularly as they've gone on, they've pretty much shared things very equally. So on this album, for example, they each get, there are 12 tracks, they each get 4 tracks.
Yeah.
And what is amazing, really, considering that, is how similar
Yeah.
the songs they come out with are. There's still very much, if you go back to the early stuff and through to today, the influence of the Byrds and Big Star is still huge over the sound of this band.
That sort of early indie psychedelia is still
Yeah.
there.
And it's if you like that sound, it is a lovely sound. And so there's nothing in that sense. There's nothing new on here. It sounds like a Teenage Fanclub album.
Yeah.
It could have been made 20 years ago. It sounds like a Teenage Fanclub.
Yeah, agree.
And it's not the best Teenage Fanclub. Ooh.
Brown out.
Apparently, somewhere somebody disagreed with me making a slight disparaging mark against Teenage Fanclub because the lights just momentarily dimmed in the room, and I've now come back up again.
We had a blackout last night.
Fine.
Or was that just me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So I think this is a good rather than a great Teenage Fanclub album on the basis of the 2 listens I've had so far. Although I will be listening to it more. I agree with you. I think I'm in Love.
It's track 1 as well.
Track 1 is a cracking track. And in fact, I think on this album the Norman Blake tracks are probably the strongest on the record. So I'm in Love, The Darkest Part of the Night, and Live in the Moment. I think amongst the best tracks on the album, and they're 3 of his. Great. Although I will also say that I think it's track 6, I Was Beautiful When I Was Live. It's also just a beautiful kind of ballad. It's a really, really lovely song.
Yeah.
So that's the other standout on the track, but standout track on the album. But I think overall, good record. And as you said, first half definitely stronger than the second half. But we'll keep fans of the band happy, and if you're not a fan of the band, it's not a bad place to jump in.
I don't think so at all.
Moving on to our ladies section, as it were, and we have the 7th studio album from Regina Spektor.
Really?
Yeah, I know. In fact, even I own a couple, and even I was surprised that it was. Even I was surprised it was the 7th. So there you go. Things you learn. Again, first in a while. I think again another 4 or 5 year break since the last album. And she's one of these artists that started off very, very quirky and has become more poppy, I suppose, with time. And I think on this album, there seems to be an effort to try and blend the two and try and reclaim some of her individual quirky appeal while still not losing some of the pop sensibilities. And for the most part, I think it kind of works.
Yeah.
And I think if you take, again, this is another example we were just talking about. I think the first 4 tracks on this album particularly are brilliant. Again, perfect mix of that thing that I'm talking about. So you have something that is pop, then followed by something that's kind of piano pop, something that's a kind of piano ballad, and then something that is very modern pop after that with Small Bills. And then the album longs a bit, and you have The Light, which is a really, really nice song, quite very emotional song. So there's lyrics in that when she goes, I know the morning is wiser than the night time. I know there's nothing wrong that I should feel so down. So many things I know, but they don't help me. Each day I open up my eyes to look around. So it's like a very kind of self-reflective and stuff. But then that song is followed by the Trapper and the Fury, which I just love. Which is about that kind of, you know, how the world is a strange place. I think the line is that when the good are damned and the wicked forgiven. And with the upcoming American election tomorrow, it seems very prescient. Yeah. Latter half of the album is slightly falls away a bit for me, and kind of stops it from being a very good pop record, and just ends up being good for me.
Okay. I agree with everything you've said up until that point. I actually found the last for me completely agree. I think the first 3 or 4 tracks do blend the pop sensibilities of latter albums with the earlier quirky stuff, and as a thing that does continue across the album. I found the last 2 or 3 tracks actually whilst you could argue much quieter in terms of pace than the rest of the album, I actually found the last 3 tracks also quite a strong ending for this. Yeah,
I mean, I didn't dislike them. I particularly think Cellar of Flowers is particularly good. And lyrically, The Visit's very, very, very nice. But yeah. I just thought, in comparison to
fair comment.
The first part of the album,
I particularly like Obsolete. You see, so I'm sort of a bit defensive. You know, I for me, Obsolete sort of is that perfect blend of her use of more quirky lyrics with a kind of a softer, more middle of the road approach. So I thought this was overall I really like this album. So this is why I'm struggling with Divine Comedy, because I think this has been my surprise of the podcast.
Okay.
Because we've reviewed records of hers before, and she's always been a bit yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
But actually, this particular record I really enjoyed more so than I thought. So hence my hesitance to sort of come down in favour of one or the other.
So how do we feel in that case about the third studio album from Angel Olson, My Woman?
Immediately following on, I found this album. Again equally enjoyable to a point. Now,
was the point when the track started getting 7.5 minutes long?
Yes,
because that was kind of where my point ended.
That was a bit of a killer for me as well. No, this album was perfectly fine. Regina Spektor, and it's very hard not to compare the two, having listened to them back to back. Regina Spektor sort of offers a very much more a masterclass in terms of how to do the quirky, thoughtful, female-led album.
Yeah,
we seem to have listened to a lot of these recently.
We've listened to a few. Yeah, you're right.
Down the list for the year, we've listened to a couple of really good examples over this year as well. So I think perhaps for me that this album does sort of fall back because I'm kind of a bit Angel Olson now. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, yeah, I mean it's a good album.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say solid.
No, and I'm going to avoid saying that too. Actually, I think there are things I like about this album. There are things I do like about this album. It has a kind of the overall vibe to it. Has kind of hints of Lana Del Rey, hints of Liz Phair, hints of Lena Lovitch at times, and even Hole, early Hole.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. The first half of the album, particularly the first 4 tracks, are all kind of 3-minute songs essentially, and really quite short. They get to the point quickly. So In Turn, the open track I really like. Then you got Shut Up and Kiss Me, which I really like.
Yeah.
And then halfway through the album, right in smack bang in the middle of my two favourite tracks, which is Not Gonna Kill You and Heart Shaped Face, which are tracks 5 and 6. After that, for some unknown reason, we go from these kind of like short, snappy, cut back songs to Sister, which is track 7, and Woman, which is track 9, where she suddenly decides to become Neil Young for some strange reason. So the tracks kind of start off the same and then get to a halfway point. And then, I don't believe it's me saying this, but then you kind of get guitar noodling for a couple of minutes. Don't get me wrong, particularly on Sister, it's very fine guitar noodling, and it's great, but it just, I don't know, it just seemed to jar in this against the rest of the record for me.
It jars against the rest of the album for me, and you put the point very clearly, which I was trying to get to. When you refer to Lana Del Rey, for example, the weakness, I guess, of the album is it reminds you of those other artists, and it reminds you actually Lana Del Rey's and Regina Spektor's Whisper It are probably doing this better.
Yeah.
But hey, it's only the third album, and I wonder if it's definitely one to watch.
Yeah, I think it's definitely true, and it's just, as I say, it's picked up some good reviews. So it's
clearly. That's another high Metacritic score you've written down.
It's been a very high Metacritic kind of podcast. It's anything.
Right.
So let's finish off with. And also, I didn't notice when I was doing the running order for the podcast, just instantly, I picked the running order and then made the our note, because I do a note every month, which just lists the tracks of the albums, what studio album it is, and the Metacritic score. But I didn't realise that I'd actually done it in order of who's released the most albums this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So it's 16, 11, 10,
So you have
7, 3 and 3. So wasn't intentional, but that's the way it worked. So as I said, we finished with another third album. Third album from Bon Iver, who, as many people might know, is the kind of Justin Vernon's kind of band persona. Released 2 albums before this, both critically praised and acclaimed to high heaven. And the last one was my favourite album of the year a few years back. And is this that classic case, I suppose, with third album? You think, where do you go when you've had 2 albums that have been that as critically acclaimed as they were? And it seems in Bon Iver, Justin Vernon's case, they decide to take the bits that caused that acclaim, chuck them in a mixing bowl, pour acid all over them, and see what happens. And and it's and before that, it sounds like I'm going to slag this record off, but I'm actually not going to slag this record off. Although I could understand why people might. The opening of this record is, I think the album as a whole, I think this is of all the albums in the podcast, I think this is the one that would be the hardest to warm to immediately, even if, like me, you're already a fan of the band. This is a fractured and purposefully abstract and often jarring record that walks a very fine line between alienating and engaging. Song titles themselves seem to be picked to add only to this. So you've got like 22, Oversoon, 10, Death Breast, 715, Creaks, 33, God. It's bizarre. But ultimately, I think it's another case. It's a very short record. It's an album that also benefits multiple listens, and I think ultimately it's an album that rewards that. Initially, I have to say, I hated it. First listen, really, really hated it. Really disappointed. Thought there was an issue with my headphone jack on the opening track. Then realised it was deliberate, and it happens a few times in the album. There's lots and lots of treated vocals on it, vocal transformation, distortions, which seems odd for somebody that has just a lovely, beautiful, pure voice. And all this is kind of built around various music samples. But why I find it so engaging, and why I kind of stuck with it, is because I suppose, and this is the added advantage of being short, is despite all that, and even as I was going through the first listen when I was pretty much hating it, I was never bored by it.
No.
Because it's constantly moving, warping, transforming sonically, and it's almost like a kind of audible piece of kind of modern art painting.
Yeah.
That said, I can still understand why people would listen to it and go, "This is a heap of shit." However, there are bits in it that just remind you of what a great songwriter is and what a beautiful voice he has. So like I said, the first track, Over Soon, is bizarre but lovely, and it is one of those things. After a couple of listens, you do find yourself wandering around, kind of going, "Over soon, over soon," wondering what you're doing. The lovers of his voice just generally will be pleased that there are some moments where he does just let his voice do what it does. So on 666 and 8, track 6 and 8 respectively, you do get pretty much clean Justin Vernon vocals, the latter of which actually reminded me a lot of a song by Magnum called Dance Mordaunt, but that's by the by. And yeah, there's not a lot to say about it. It's an album that is quite hard to describe, and because of that, it's kind of hard to pick tracks and say I really like this track, even though I've just done that with a couple of them, because it's hard to describe what the tracks are about and put them in the context of, apart from just saying it is very experimental. It is him kind of going, you know what, let's just fuck with people's heads.
It's an album that needs to be listened to in its entirety.
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
Yeah, this is not going to work because there's no singles on this record.
There's no singles or downloads on this record. And it is a record. I actually had a reverse experience of you, from you to a point, in that I actually really enjoyed it on first listen. Once I'd equally, and I laughed heartily, got over the what the hell is wrong with my headphones moment right at the start.
Yeah.
Once I'd got past that, and I thought, well, they're just fucking with my head. I was fine, perfectly fine with this, with that track, and it's that effect of sort of deliberately messing with your headphones is repeated, as you say. I think it's on Stratford Apartments.
Yeah.
And that irritated me too, but then I giggled because I'd been irritated the first time, and then they just repeated the trick. It's, as you say, a shame that there's a lot of that, because yes, lyrically he has got such a beautiful voice, and he's able to convey a lot of emotion, different emotions, through his lyrics and through his voice in particular. But that aside, I actually found the experimental stuff, and I was completely okay with it. There was nowhere else for me that a Bon Iver album could go after the previous two albums. For me, it had to be something like this. It had to sort of push the critical acclaimed elements to the edge.
Well, I think he said something similar. I think he said in an interview that you know that he had to make it sound radical for him, for him to feel good about putting anything out there in the first place. Otherwise, it wasn't. You know, that classic. You know, I could just make the same albums, the same two albums I've just made again, but if I'm sticking my name to it, I don't want to do that.
That would be boring. So for me, this I really enjoyed this record. Hence why I'm struggling once again to pick a favourite, because I think this is up there.
So,
what is
put on the spot if you
put me on the spot? Okay.
If you had to take one,
which one
would it be?
If I had to take one, I'd take the Bon Iver one, actually.
Interesting choice, but as I said, the Bon Iver album is probably my second favourite album of the podcast, simply because it is, like I said, it is one of those records that is Well, yeah, because it's not boring. I mean, it's as simple as that in a way. It is challenging, and it does actually make you think, which occasionally is not always a good thing. No. Occasionally, just listen to put great pop is great. But
it's an entertaining record, like the Divine Comedy record, which would be my second choice, with Regina Spektor in there somewhere as well. So there you go.
Okay, that's us done for now. We are hopefully back with you by at the end of the month, and the plan for the next podcast, I can tell you, avid listeners, is to review the new albums from Sting, Little Mix, Robbie Williams, Metallica, Bon Jovi, and Bruno Mars. So an exciting cacophony of sounds there.
We're going for it next time, aren't we?
Yeah. Then after that, Christmas podcast. Yay!
That was the sound of me checking out.
Yeah, the sound of silence.
Indeed.
Hello to Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah, well, you're quite. Hello, darkness.
You've been listening to the CTTV Music Podcast.